Hi, Sec 3 students. Okay, in the previous lessons, we've been speaking a lot about reasons for the rise of Hitler. We are now moving on to the second part of the chapter, which is really focusing on impact of Hitler's rule. In today's lesson, we will only be covering political and economic impact. So hold on for the next video that will be discussing about the social impact of Hitler's rule. The first thing we need to ask ourselves is, how do we assess impact? Impact can be beneficial versus not beneficial. It can be successful versus unsuccessful. It can be improve the life of someone versus did not improve. It can be good or bad. It can be positive or negative. So have some of these words at the back of your head as we go through all the different impacts under Hitler's rule. So the first part that I'm going to focus on is the political impact of Hitler's rule. Okay, bear in mind that we left off in the previous chapter when Hitler became the Chancellor. So we are talking about January 1933. So as a general rule, when we talk about impact of Hitler's rule, we are talking about what happens after January 1933. Okay, so let's start with political. One of the first impacts of Hitler's rule will be the Reichstag fire. So the Reichstag is actually the German parliament. And this guy called van der Lubbe, he's a Dutch communist, he was found to be around the parliament at that point of time. And therefore, the communists as a whole were blamed and arrested for starting a fire in the Reichstag and supposedly attempting to overthrow the whole government. It was at this point of time that Hitler abused or made use of very smartly Article 48. The president is the only one who is allowed to use Article 48. But because of the Reichstag fire, Hitler managed to convince President Hindenburg to invoke Article 48. And via this article, all civil liberties such as freedom of the press and freedom to assemble in public were suspended. Okay, opponents of Hitler were also arrested, and a lot of communists were arrested as a result of the Reichstag fire. Okay? The next political impact under Hitler's rule will be the establishment of the Enabling Act. So the Enabling Act would basically allow Hitler to pass laws without the president's approval. This was very, very important for Hitler because he needed to consolidate his power. Although the Nazi Party was very, very strong in the Reichstag, they were not the strongest. And for any policy to be carried out, it would need at least a 50% majority, which the Nazis did not really have. Therefore, the Enabling Act would be crucial in allowing Hitler to pass laws regardless of what the German parliament says or regardless of what President Hindenburg says. So on the day of voting whether or not to approve this act, Hitler's men surrounded the building and only allowed entrance to Nazis and their supporters. What that means is people like the communists, they were not allowed to take part in this voting, and therefore naturally the Enabling Act ended up being passed because the situation of the voting itself was favorable to the Nazi Party. The Communist Party were henceforth banned from taking part in future elections, and the reason why Hitler could do this is because he had the power of the Enabling Act. After the Enabling Act comes, now he has power, right? He's able to carry out legislative laws without the permission of President Hindenburg. One of the first things he will do, he will establish a one-party rule. In other words, the Nazi Party becomes the only legal political party in Germany, and the Nazi officials take charge of all the local governments. All trade unions are dissolved, opponents are sent to concentration camps or they fled Germany. Okay, your Communist Party, your Social Democratic Party, they are all officially considered illegal. Now that he has all this power, right, he's already able to get rid of all the other illegal, so-called illegal parties. What he wants to do now is to clear up his own Nazi party. Hitler's supporters, Hermann Göring and Heinrich Himmler, they felt threatened by this guy called Ernst Röhm, who was the leader of the army. And as you know, anybody who's a leader of an army is extremely powerful. So they were worried that Ernst Röhm will actually threaten Hitler's position. So these two people, Hitler's supporter, they went to convince Hitler that Röhm should be removed from the army. And in order to do this, what they did was they carried out this thing called the Night of the Long Knives. On June 1934, The SS, Hitler's bodyguards, arrested and killed Röhm and other SA leaders. A total of 400 men were executed. So he has already consolidated power in terms of the Nazi Party being the only legal party. But in addition to that, he's also establishing control within the Nazi Party by eliminating anybody who might be a threat to his own power. Now, at this stage, something else will happen that will make Hitler literally the most powerful man in Germany. No questions henceforth. And that's the creation of the Führer position, which is only made possible because of President Hindenburg's death. The president will pass away in 1934, and Hitler will take advantage of this situation and merge the powers of the president and the chancellor, and he will be now made Führer. He can now invoke Article 48, which means to declare emergency on his own, and Hitler is now above the law. So by 1934, he is the most powerful man in Germany, and his word is really the law. So what we have done now is very briefly cover the political impact of Hitler's rule. Now I'm going to move to the economic impact. If you recall, Hitler, when he was trying to get people to vote for him, one of the things he said was that he's going to make Germany strong again. And how do you make Germany strong again? You revive the economy, you provide more job opportunities. And Hitler did keep to his words. He did introduce re-employment. So one way in which he tried to create more job opportunities was he created public works programs, such as the buildings of roads, motorways, and public buildings. So all these programs, you need people to work for it to function, right? So it helped to reduce unemployment. And he also introduced conscription, which is basically like your NS, to help solve the problem of unemployment. So these people were earning a living. In addition to that, he also, one of the other economic impacts was also the rise of big industrialists, powerhouse industrialists. Under the new plan of 1934, industries important to Germany were subsidized and imports were barred. So what that means is that foreign goods cannot enter Germany's country. So people in Germany have to use German goods produced by German industries. What this does is to protect Germany's economy. In addition to that, he will ban trade unions, because the thing about trade unions is that although their primary function is to protect the interests of the workers, very often when there are multiple trade unions, the entire working environment becomes very disruptive. So he banned trade unions to help big businesses control their workers better. And under Goering's 4-year plan, they were preparing Germany for war in 4 years. Remember, the other goal is for him to carry out Lebensraum, which is taking over living space to accommodate the needs of his people. So he needs to invade sooner or later, right? So under Goering's plan, the state spent massive amounts on rearmament and boosted the income of companies involved. And these companies, in return, made donations to the Nazi Party. So the Nazi Party also benefits from this rise of big industrialists. The next thing then is the control of trade unions. So in the previous slide, we briefly spoke about this, but let me go a bit deeper. They banned all the trade unions and they established their own trade union or workers' organization called the German Work Front or DAF. Under the German Work Front, workers were not allowed to bargain or strike. Workers needed government permission to leave jobs, and in 1935, they even imposed a wage freeze. A wage freeze is basically your salary cannot go up any higher. And workers worked up to 72 hours a week, which is really quite a crazy amount of hours to be working for. So if you really think about it, the control of trade unions, it was definitely not good for the workers, but it was very, very good for the state because they were able to control the workers and they were able to achieve their outcomes, whatever it may be. Another thing that they will do is to organize workers' leisure time. So you think about it, right? They're already restricting them in their working environment, but now they're also controlling the leisure time, which is supposed to be the relaxation time of the workers. The DAF, which is the German Work Front, set up schemes such as Strength Through Joy, which provided cheap theatre and cinema tickets and organized courses and cultural sports. They also set up the Beauty of Labour scheme, which sought to improve the working conditions of workers, such as giving them washing facilities and low-cost canteens were set up. But if you really think about it, this is just a form of propaganda. They are trying to make it seem as if they are good people towards the workers, even though at the same time they are expecting the workers to work 72 hours, and it's not as if their salary can increase if they work harder. So you have to weigh it out. Okay, did the German workers really support these schemes? Okay, that's a question mark itself. And the last thing they will do under economic impact is they will introduce militarization. So we spoke about this briefly, about conscription briefly, when we talked about Goering's 4-year plan. So in 1935, conscription was introduced, and by 1939, there were 1.4 million men in the army. So what that means is that the problem of unemployment has been severely reduced because there's a lot of job opportunities for men now. So it's also partly from here that he's going to strengthen his army and later carry out what we call his expansionist policy, where he takes other territories and conquers them. Okay, so with that, we have covered economic and political impact, and it will be the end for now.